Welcome to On the Town this week. We're here in Los Angeles, actually in Beverly Hills, for California Spirit 13. It's a event for the American Cancer Society with some of the best chefs in California coming together for the benefit of the society as a fundraiser. It's become an annual event put on by Wolfgang Puck. Now, every year, the best chefs in California come together, and this year, they're putting together an award for the grande dame of all the celebrity chefs here in California. Now, we brought her out here from the East Coast, and with me today, we're lucky enough to be the only camera crew to have an interview with her before she goes on to this great event. I'm here with Julia Child. Well, this is a familiar face that I think most of television knows for a long time. First of all, when was the last time you came out to California?
Well, I'm a Californian anyway, and I have a pad in Santa Barbara, so I was here. I left at the end of January.
Julie, you're being honored tonight by the American Cancer Society, and you're part of the Public Awareness Council for them. And this is a very meaningful group for you today. And could you talk a little bit about that?
Well, I had breast cancer myself. That was about 30 years ago. But I discovered it myself. I think several famous people like Happy Rockefeller and Shirley Temple had it, so people were beginning to be aware of it. But before that, I think people just died off and nobody knew what they had. But I think it's tremendously important for everybody to have an examination every single year and also a monthly self-examination, because that's how I found it. I have found a lump the size of a lima bean. And I went immediately to my doctor, and they immediately took it out because it was cancerous. I've never had the slightest thing since. And luckily for me, they didn't have any of these, no, I shouldn't say luckily, but I didn't have to have any of those chemotherapies or things. I was fortunate. But exactly the same thing is true with men and prostate cancer. You must have an examination every year and do something about it immediately. And if you don't, in 2 years you're dead, and that's really true because it metastasized and you've had it.
I guess
just because you've been stupid or fearful.
Well, is the moral of the story early detection?
Oh, very, very much. Some people, of course, you do get some cases where it just gallops right through you, but that's rare.
Right.
But it is, both prostate and breast cancer are curable. They can take it out, and so I think, and I hope you're being careful.
I think so. I think really our moral of the story really is that not only is it curable, but it's so treatable if you catch it early.
It's so avoidable.
That's correct.
And the thing is, if you don't catch it, you're through.
You've been a great spokesman for the American Cancer Society. I know they love having you out here, and of course, you're the chefs that are there that night. Like I said earlier in the program, you're the grande dame for them. So this is a match made in heaven, and hopefully with the identity and the public awareness that this event will show and your appearance out here, if it causes some people to reflect and look at themselves, then this event was well worth it.
Everybody must do it.
You know, this event tonight, and I want to tell you something, this event where all these great chefs are getting together is something that has become the new vogue event for charity associations all around the country. And it's kind of interesting, in the 50s and 40s, great chefs were artisans, but they weren't considered artists, were they?
No, and they are artists, but it's interesting. It does, as you said when we were talking, it does seem to have changed in the 60s, as you mentioned, with René Verdon at the White House and the Kennedys. And then I think the aeroplane had a lot to do with it, because when I was younger, you had to go by boat, and it took you 5 or 6 days to get there and 5 or 6 days to come back. And it was only the leisure classes that went over there, because it just took too long.
I think it was kind of interesting because a lot of great chefs got their start really on a cruise ship too, and that happens today too. I mean, it's a lot of work in those kitchens.
Well, and some of the great chefs like Escoffier were also on cruise ships.
You know, you mentioned the 60s, and I think it's very interesting. Two major events happened in the early 60s that really took French cooking and French cuisine to become a mainstay in the United States. First of all, you had the inauguration of John Kennedy and famous chef Rene Verdun, who really made the state dinners the event to be at.
And they were written about, and before food hadn't been paid much attention to, I think.
And then there was a very famous book by a very famous author in 1961, The Art of French Cooking. Now, tell me about that book that you started and what it really did to your career.
Well, I really hadn't done much cooking until I got married, but my husband Paul had been brought up with a very good cooking because his mother cooked, and then they lived in France. And in those days, a lot of people didn't speak French well, but he spoke very good French, and we were sent over there. We were in the embassy. And as soon as I tasted that food, that was for me.
Right.
And luckily, the cordon bleu was going, and I didn't want to take a ladies' class, and fortunately, there was a group of GIs, because in those days you got some free education.
Right.
So down in the cellar with the wonderful old chef of the old school, Max Bugnard, they didn't mind if I joined them, and that was my beginning. And he was a wonderful man, and I was so impressed with all of the chefs whom I knew, that they really took it as an art form. It made no difference how long it took or how complicated it was worth doing right. And I think that the spirit of really very seriousness is what inspired me.
Julie, what inspired you to write the book, though?
Well, when we got there the end of 1948, and a lot of the Americans in the embassy nobody cooked and nobody was interested in cooking, but they were delighted to have little French maids of all work, les femmes de, well, I guess they were femmes de ménage. And I became very interested. And I couldn't find anyone else who was interested at all. And then we had a mutual friend who knew of a French woman, Simone Beck, known as Simca. She felt the same way, but she'd done a lot of cooking and knew a lot about it. And so we met each other, and it was wonderful to meet someone who had the same feelings I did. And she and her colleague Louisette were writing a book on French cooking for Americans, and they had an American chap who was doing English translating, and he died. And I was delighted, because I wanted to work with him. So that's really how I got into it. And then I had some American friends who came over, and they said, well, we don't speak French, and we want you to teach us how to cook. And Simca was always enthusiastic. He said, fine. And so 2 days later, we started our school called the École des Trois Gourmands, the School of the Three Hearty Eaters. And then we had to write recipes for it, of course, as we were giving them a serious course.
Right.
And that's how the book began. And then I thought it would be fun to do a book too, so I sent copies to a lot of my friends back home to see whether they'd be interested, because I really hadn't done any cooking at all until I'd gotten married. And the recipes in those days were very, very short. It didn't really give you any details. But I wanted, if I was broiling a chicken, I would want to know how far from the heat and how often you basted it and so forth. So our recipes were long.
Right.
I'm known for long recipes. And so that's how it started.
Were sauces a big thing at that time in the late 40s and early 50s?
Well, I think the sauce kind of comes with the dish. I think people who don't know much about cooking, they always say, oh, this sauce and this and that. But it's always really part of a dish.
Right.
And you know how to do the basics, and it's how you vary it, I think.
Now, how did you spring from your book to the PBS show?
To the television. Well, it took us about 10 years to get the book done. And
Well, it came out in
Well,
1961.
1961, and we
Right.
started in the 50s. And we came back to Cambridge, and I thought I'd give cooking lessons and probably start an ice cream factory or something. And then we had a friend who was in educational television, and at that time it was mostly talk and
Right.
science and stuff. And they wanted to enlarge the audience, and so they said, well, how about trying us out? So I did 3 pilot programs, and it turned out there really was an audience out there.
Sure.
So that's how we started. And we started the first 13 were done on borrowed tape, or old tapes, so they don't even exist anymore.
Right.
But it turned out there was a very definite audience, and there was nobody else cooking. Deone Lucas, you remember hearing about her. She had started at the beginning of television. Television wasn't very old at that point. And then when I came along, nobody was cooking, luckily
Right.
for me. So I had the whole place to myself for about a year or two.
I think looking back on those original shows, I think what really endeared you to a lot of people is the fact that you took the cooking seriously, but you didn't take yourself seriously.
Yes, and then I think, too, it's not as difficult as that. And I think, and before it was kind of we happy few and sort of la-di-da, and you'd never be able to do it, you dumb clout. But I think the fact that I was informal and just like a person,
Sure.
that they'd look at me and they'd say, well, if she can do it, I can certainly do it. Which
know,
I
there's-
think was useful.
There's one show that is very memorable for me, which I think maybe kind of sums up maybe my attitude in looking at those shows. You could take a subject that looked overwhelming and then actually take that overwhelming subject and say, this is simple. And I wanted to remind you of that show. You took the center cut of a, looked like a swordfish with the bone in the middle, must have been, I don't know,
Oh, I
3 feet
remember.
around.
Yes, our
and you-
fishman loaned it to me. That
and
was wonderful.
You slapped it up on the counter. We saw these 5 different steaks packed into a real fish, cut in half. Like, how in the hell are you going to go ahead and approach this? But by the time you were done, you explained each cut around the bone, how to cut through it, how to
And it
fillet
was
it.
very easy because my fish friend had showed me how. It was very simple. I can't remember now. I thought they were just cut between or in the middle or
Right.
something.
I remember one other one where you lined up a number of different sizes of poultry.
Ah,
It was like a dancing chorus line.
Yes.
Started with the all the way down to the different
yes, that
sizes.
was fun.
And next thing you know, you were addressing them as if they were humans. And one question, this would be a great trivia question. How many times did you show the audience how to debone a chicken or to cut up a chicken?
We certainly
you got-
showed it quite a number of times,
Right.
didn't we? And I hope somebody learned.
Yeah.
Well, have you ever seen Jacques Pepin cut
Oh,
it
yes.
up in
Well,
17 seconds?
Well, he also looks like he's a pure butcher. I mean, or his background of butchering.
he's wonderable, yes.
He has maybe a little different style. I really enjoy his show too because he takes
he's
it
a
simple. He takes a dish and makes it looks like so simple to prepare it. You know.
Well, he's such a pro. too.
Right.
Very.
It's interesting. You know, your series was started with yourself, and then in your later series, you started bringing in guest chefs, showing who they were, really introducing them to the country, not just to one city, but
Yes,
introducing to the
everybody.
country. And
That's why also when we're doing the chef series that we want to get men as well as women, and we want to get people from all over the country because it is a national show.
Right. But this idea of bringing these guest chefs in and introducing them to the country, you made them famous. You made their restaurants famous.